Relentless, thick, cold, unforgiving. It pounded against the windshield of Daniel's taxi like it was trying to drown the city. He pulled over at the edge of a dimly lit alley, engine idling, shoulders slumped. His shift was done. 14 hours on the road and his back ached like he was twice his age. He rubbed his temples, eyes bloodshot, hands calloused. The silence in the car pressed down on him like weight. No music, no chatter, just the hum of exhaustion and the soft ticking of the dashboard clock. 12:43 a.m. He reached for the key, ready to shut it all off, when his radio crackled to life. "Unit 17, we have a priority request," came the dispatcher's voice, too cheerful for this hour. "Pickup requested at 118 West Maple Drive, no destination listed. Note says, please arrive as soon as possible." Daniel exhaled. "Maple Drive? That's the Ridgeview Estates area, right?" "Correct," the voice replied. "Client sounds distressed. Female, mid-30s maybe, no further details. You want it?" He closed his eyes for a moment. That part of town wasn't his usual route. Big gates, quiet streets, houses that looked like magazines no one lived in. But something in the dispatcher's tone, tight, concerned, nudged him. "I'll take it," he said, headed there now. 10 minutes later, his tires rolled up the circular driveway of a mansion, shrouded in shadow. The rain hadn't let up. It washed over the marble steps and down into the gutters, pooling like black mirrors around the wheels. Daniel turned off the engine, stepped out into the storm, and jogged toward the front door. There was no umbrella, no awning, just water and silence. He rang the bell. Seconds passed, then a minute. He rang again. Finally, the door opened. She stood there, barefoot, her blonde hair clinging to her face in wet strands. Her silk robe, cream-colored and soaked at the hem, hung loose over a nightgown that did little to hide her trembling. Her face was blotchy, eyes red-rimmed. She looked like someone who had stopped pretending hours ago. "Are you Daniel?" she asked, voice raw. He nodded slowly. "Taxi service. You requested a pickup." She nodded, but didn't move. Her hand clutched the edge of the doorframe like she was holding on to the only stable thing in her world. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know who else to call. I don't want to go anywhere. She swallowed hard, tears spilling again. "I just can't be alone tonight. Please, could you just stay?" Daniel blinked. The rain dripped from his hair, off the tip of his nose. He could feel his shirt clinging to his back, his socks already soaked through. But he didn't move. He looked at her, really looked. She was terrified, not in danger, not hysterical, just completely, utterly alone. "I don't have anything to offer you," she added quickly, eyes pleading. I don't know what else to do." For a moment, Daniel felt his body stiffen. He was a stranger. She didn't know him. He didn't know her. This was not how things worked. But then, something flickered in her eyes. Desperation. Familiarity. A depth of pain that spoke to his own. He exhaled, slow and heavy. The kind of breath you take when you're about to step into something you don't understand, but somehow already feel. He nodded once. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll stay." Her shoulders sagged in relief. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Thank you," she whispered. As he stepped inside, he instinctively bent down and removed his shoes, leaving them in the entryway without a word. She glanced down at them, then back at him. A flicker of something soft passed across her face. "You can sit in the living room, or kitchen, wherever. I just need to feel like someone else is breathing in this house." He nodded again, his voice low. "That's okay." She turned and walked down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness beyond. He stood in the foyer for a moment, dripping, before moving forward, each step quiet, careful. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his past, but as the door closed behind him and the rain kept pouring outside, Daniel knew this wasn't just another stop. Something had just begun. The house was beautiful, but it didn't feel alive. Daniel stepped carefully across polished hardwood floors, the kind that echoed with each footstep. Chandeliers loomed overhead, untouched. The walls bore expensive art, but none of it felt chosen. The air was heavy, too still, like the house had been holding its breath for weeks. He found her in the living room, curled on a long white couch. Her robe had fallen off one shoulder, and she was hugging a throw pillow to her chest like it was an anchor. She didn't turn when he entered, only whispered, "You don't have to talk. I just didn't want silence anymore." Daniel nodded. He set his damp jacket on a nearby chair, then moved to the kitchen without a word. The marble counters were spotless. It took him a moment to find the mugs. He boiled water, found some mint tea, and returned with 2 cups, steam curling into the dim air. When he placed one beside her, she looked up briefly. Her eyes were hollow, ringed with shadows. "Thank you," she murmured. He sat on the armchair opposite her, his hands wrapped around the warm mug, waiting. Minutes passed. The rain beat against the windows. Then, her voice, fragile, barely above a breath. His name was Cole. Daniel looked at her gently. "My husband. He died 3 months ago. Car accident. They say it was fast. I still imagine him calling me before it happened. I don't know why I do that. He didn't. But I imagine it." She gave a bitter laugh. "I thought I had time to grieve. But then Lily, our daughter, she started crying all night. Every night. Like she was mourning too." Daniel listened, unmoving. "I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since he died. Every time she cries, something in me shatters. It's not just the sound, it's what it reminds me of. It's like a wound reopening again and again." She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her robe. "And then I started getting afraid of her. My own child. Can you imagine that?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, but I can understand being afraid of yourself." Her eyes snapped to him, surprised by his voice. "I've been there," he added. "Different reasons. Same silence." A sudden, muffled cry broke the stillness. Both their heads turned. From somewhere down the hall, the sound of a baby whimpering drifted through the air. Isabel stood up instinctively, then froze. Daniel saw it in her, the hesitation, the fear, not because she didn't care, but because she was drowning and the sound of her own daughter was the wave crashing over her. She looked at him, ashamed. "She always wakes at this time. I try, but sometimes I just sit outside her door and wait for it to stop. And then I cry, because what kind of mother does that?" Daniel rose quietly, walked past her, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder as he passed. It was a soft, steady touch, not pity, not judgment, just presence. In the hallway, the cries were getting louder. He didn't wait for permission. He opened the nursery door. Soft pink walls, a white crib, a mobile of stars hanging still. And in the center, a small girl, blonde curls, flushed cheeks, tiny hands clenched in distress. Daniel stepped in, knelt beside the crib, and whispered, "Hey there, little one." Lily blinked through tears, hiccuped, and stared at him. He reached down, slowly, carefully. She didn't pull away. Isabel stood at the doorway, hand covering her mouth, watching as Daniel gently lifted Lily into his arms. He rocked her, humming something old and low, a lullaby long buried in his memory. The child's cries quieted, and Isabel, just for a moment, breathed. Lily had fallen asleep in Daniel's arms. She was warm and small, her breath steadying as the tears faded, one by one. Daniel sat in the nursery's rocking chair, the soft creak of the wood the only sound besides the rain whispering against the window. Isabel stood at the doorway, wrapped in silence, watching the stranger in her house cradle her daughter like she was made of porcelain and memories. After a few moments, she whispered, "You're good with her." Daniel didn't look up. He kept his gaze on the child in his arms, brushing a damp curl away from her cheek. "I used to be a dad," he said quietly. Isabel stepped inside the room, hesitating. She moved slowly, like approaching an animal in the wild. She sat down across from him, on the low ottoman near the foot of the crib. He glanced at her, then returned his gaze to Lily. Her name was Ellie, he said. She had this wild laugh, like a hiccup and a howl at the same time. She liked dinosaurs and peanut butter. She called every green thing broccoli. Isabel smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Daniel's face didn't soften. If anything, it grew stiller. She got sick when she was 4, he continued. Congenital heart defect. We didn't know until it was almost too late. My wife and I, we tried everything. Hospital to hospital, doctors, specialists. But it was always a losing game. He exhaled, slow and shaky. I picked up 3 jobs, drove nights, slept maybe an hour a day. I used to nap in the hospital parking lot between shifts. She'd press her little hands against the glass when she saw me come through the door. His voice wavered. She died a week after her 5th birthday. We had just saved enough for the surgery too late. Isabel brought a hand to her mouth. My wife, she left not long after. Said she couldn't stay in a house filled with ghosts. I didn't blame her, but I couldn't leave either. So I stayed, with the silence. He looked down at Lily, now sleeping against his chest, her tiny fingers curled into his shirt. Sometimes I still hear her voice, he whispered, calling me. Daddy, clear as day. And when I wake up, there's nothing, just the dark and the quiet and the ache in my ribs where she used to lie. Isabel pressed both hands over her heart. Her breath came short, eyes glassy. That's what it feels like, she whispered. That's exactly what it feels like. He looked up at her then, and in that moment, 2 people who had never spoken before tonight, who didn't know each other's last names, sat in a room not as strangers, but as survivors of the same invisible storm. Isabel's voice trembled. I thought I was the only one. You're not, Daniel said. I keep thinking, she went on, if I were stronger, better, then maybe I could love her the way she deserves. But I look at her and I feel like I'm underwater. Like I'm screaming, but it's all happening in slow motion. Daniel nodded. Grief's a thief, but shame's a liar. You love her. That's why it hurts. She covered her eyes, trying not to fall apart. I don't know how to fix it. You don't, Daniel replied. You just hold on. You let the quiet pass through you, not into you, and sometimes you let someone else carry it for a while. Silence settled again, this time softer. Lily stirred slightly, then stilled. Her face nestled into Daniel's chest. Her breathing was deep now, peaceful. Isabel looked at her daughter, then at the man holding her. You must have loved her so much, she said. We still do, he whispered. She nodded, slowly. And then, without thinking, Isabel reached forward and touched Daniel's hand. Not to comfort him, not to be comforted, but to say, simply, I see you. Their fingers stayed there, barely touching, 2 people connected by pain but no longer defined by it. And for the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt full. The kitchen was the warmest part of the house, not because of heat, but because it felt the most human. A single light above the sink cast a soft glow over the white-tiled counters. It was clean but lived in, unlike the sterile perfection of the rest of the home. A child's sippy cup sat next to a polished coffee machine. A dish towel hung lopsided over the oven handle. Daniel stood at the stove, waiting for the kettle to whistle. His jacket still dripped rainwater where it hung on the back of a chair. Across the room, Isabel sat with her knees tucked up to her chest, arms wrapped around them. Her hair was damp, curling slightly from the moisture. She looked younger in this light, more fragile, less polished. He set a cup of tea in front of her and slid into the seat across from her. Neither of them spoke. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was necessary, a shared breath in a night full of ghosts. Isabel reached for the cup with both hands. Her fingers were cold against the ceramic. She took a sip, closed her eyes. "I forgot how good this could feel," she murmured. Daniel sipped his own, watching her over the rim. They didn't talk about what they did for work. They didn't ask where the other came from. For now, names and titles were irrelevant. It was just two people, both broken in different ways, grasping at something steady. The clock ticked softly behind them. After a while, Isabel spoke again, her voice low, as if afraid to wake something sleeping nearby. "I used to think I'd be a great mom," she said. "I read the books, took the classes, practiced breathing exercises, and picked the nursery paint before I even knew her gender." Daniel smiled faintly. "What color did you choose?" "Lavender. Calming, they said." She paused. "It doesn't feel calming now." He nodded. She looked down into her tea. "After Cole died, I thought I'd break. But I didn't. Not right away. I took care of Lily. I did everything I was supposed to do. Feed her, change her, rock her to sleep. I even smiled in photos." She swallowed hard, but the cries got louder. "And my head got darker. And one day I realized I was scared to go into her room, scared of the sound of her needing me, when I didn't feel like I had anything left to give." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "I'm scared of myself. I never imagined motherhood would feel like fear." Daniel didn't flinch. "You're not a bad mother," he said calmly. "You're just tired, and grief doesn't wait for you to recover before piling on guilt." Her lips trembled. "You say it so simply." "Because I've lived it." She let out a breath that sounded like a sob she didn't want to release. Then, from down the hallway, a soft whimper, followed by a cry. Isabel stiffened. Her hands clenched around the mug, her body froze, shoulders tight, breath held. Daniel saw it, the panic behind her eyes. She started, but her voice caught. He stood slowly, gently touched her arm. "I've got her." She didn't stop him. He walked into the nursery, his footsteps quiet and sure. Lily was sitting up, crying, her small body trembling in the crib. Daniel knelt, reached in and lifted her carefully. She curled into him like she remembered the comfort from before. He returned to the kitchen, gently bouncing the child against his chest. Isabel stood, staring, her hand pressed to her lips. She didn't move, didn't speak. Daniel began to hum, a lullaby, soft and weathered. His voice wasn't perfect, but it was steady, reassuring. Lily's cries slowed, then faded, her breathing steadied. She fell asleep against his shoulder. Isabel let out a sound, a quiet, crumbling sound, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't sob, she didn't wail. She just cried, the kind of cry that came from watching someone do what you wish you could and realizing they're not trying to replace you, they're showing you it's possible. Daniel rocked the baby gently, then glanced at Isabel. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. She nodded slowly, her shoulders falling. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the sound of her child. Because someone had shown her it could be answered with peace. The kitchen had grown quiet again. The tea had long since gone cold, and the storm outside had eased to a gentle drizzle. Rain no longer pounded, it whispered. The clock ticked past 3 a.m., but time had stopped meaning anything. Daniel remained in the wooden chair, Lily still curled against his chest, her small breaths rising and falling in a perfect rhythm. Isabel sat a few feet away on the love seat, her head resting on the armrest, her body angled toward him. Her eyelids fluttered now and then, but she had slipped into sleep, a sleep so deep, so quiet, that Daniel instinctively softened every movement, like he was afraid to disturb something sacred. He hadn't seen someone sleep like that in a long time, not out of exhaustion, but out of safety. He adjusted the blanket around Lily and shifted slightly, careful not to wake either of them. The chair creaked beneath him, and in the silence, he began to speak. Not loudly, not even expecting the baby to understand. Just enough to let something inside him breathe. "There was once a little girl," he whispered, "who thought the moon followed her home every night. She'd point out the car window and say, "Daddy, look, it's chasing us." He smiled, faintly. She loved dinosaurs and ice cream, and hated naps. She used to pretend to read books and make up the stories. Her favorite was about a rabbit who couldn't stop hopping. He rocked Lily gently, like he had done countless times before with another tiny soul. One night, he continued, she had a fever. I thought it was nothing, just a cold. I held her and said, "Daddy's here, you're okay." She smiled, said, "You're my moon, Daddy." His voice cracked then. I didn't know it would be the last night. He closed his eyes, tears slipping silently down his cheek. Daniel looked down at Lily, brushing a wisp of hair from her forehead. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry I wasn't there more. Sorry I worked so much. I thought I had more time." He took a shaky breath. "But tonight, someone else needed a story, and she reminded me what it felt like. To hold a heartbeat that trusts you, to feel small fingers on your chest." He kissed the top of Lily's head. "And somehow, in holding her, I felt you again." Lily shifted, nuzzled closer. Isabel stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Her breathing was even, her face soft. Daniel sat in the stillness, cradling a child who wasn't his, in a home that wasn't his, beside a woman he barely knew, and yet everything about the moment felt like it had waited years to exist. He didn't know what would happen when the sun came up, whether she would thank him and send him away, or ask questions neither of them were ready to answer. But for now, there was only this room. Only this peace. Only this night, where grief met healing and pain met presence. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The sky was still dark, but the rain had finally stopped. A gentle mist clung to the windows, casting the world outside in soft gray. Inside the house, everything was still. Everything but Daniel. He sat motionless in the kitchen, Lily sound asleep against his chest, her tiny hand still curled into the fabric of his shirt. Across from him, Isabel remained fast asleep on the love seat. Her head had tilted slightly, her arm now draped over a throw pillow, her breathing calm. Daniel hadn't moved in over an hour, but he wasn't tired. He was filled with something else, something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Clarity. As quietly as he could, he stood. Lily stirred but did not wake. He gently shifted her weight and walked down the hallway, retracing steps he now knew by heart. The nursery door creaked open, and he stepped inside. He lowered Lily into her crib slowly, placing her head gently against the plush bunny pillow at the corner. She shifted once, sighed, and settled. He smiled and whispered, "Sweet dreams, little moon." Then he turned back down the hallway, toward the living room, toward Isabel. She hadn't moved much. A soft strand of blonde hair had fallen across her cheek. Her robe had slipped again, exposing her shoulder to the cool morning air. Daniel knelt beside her. He looked at her face, soft, calm, no longer tight with fear or exhaustion. She was, for once, resting. He reached for the throw blanket from the back of the couch and draped it over her gently. Then, in a quiet moment of instinct, he brushed that loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't wake. He stayed kneeling for another second, and then he stood. He walked into the kitchen, pulled a notepad from the drawer next to the fridge. He had seen it earlier, beside the unopened mail and a half-burned candle. He tore a single sheet. The pen glided with a slow, careful hand, each letter deliberate, each word chosen. He folded the note once and placed it on the edge of the coffee table beside her teacup. Then, without a sound, he slipped his shoes on, opened the door, and stepped into the pale morning. The silence in the house stretched into the early light. It was the sun, not an alarm or a cry, that stirred Isabel. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, adjusting to the light bleeding through the curtains. For a moment she blinked in confusion. The last thing she remembered was sitting in the kitchen. Then she noticed something. Weight. warmth. She looked down. Lily, her daughter, was nestled against her chest, her small arm looped tightly around Isabel's waist, her head resting just beneath her collarbone. She was breathing deeply, peacefully, still asleep. Isabel froze. She hadn't held Lily like this in weeks, not since the first wave of panic, not since the walls of her grief had convinced her she was a danger to her own child. Yet here they were, entwined, whole. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted them to wrap around her daughter. She held her close, really close. And the tears came, silent, full, steady, not tears of shame, not fear, but something else. Something she had not felt in a long time, relief. Then her eyes caught something on the table. A folded piece of paper. She reached for it with one hand, still holding Lily with the other. Opening it, she read the handwriting. "You're not broken, you're just tired. So was I. D." She let out a shaky breath. The words sank deep like a warm cloth over a raw wound. She pressed the note to her chest and looked at her daughter. No tears, no noise, just peace. She whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't clear if she meant it for Lily or Daniel or both, but she said it again. "Thank you." And for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the sound of her child waking up. The days that followed were not easy, but they were different. Isabel started to wake up before Lily cried, not in panic, just in quiet readiness. She began to write in a journal each morning, even if it was just a sentence. She cooked for herself. Not elaborate meals, just scrambled eggs, oatmeal, soup from a can, but she ate. She scheduled her first therapy session, and when the therapist asked what had shifted, Isabel simply said, "Someone came, then left, and reminded me I wasn't the only one." Lily changed too. She laughed more, slept better. She reached for Isabel with open arms, no longer flinching from the disconnection that had once stood between them. But Isabel hadn't stopped thinking about him, about Daniel, the stranger who had sat in her kitchen and held her child like she was precious, who had spoken of loss with tenderness, not fear, who had left her with nothing but a folded note and a memory that somehow felt like a promise. She kept the note in her nightstand. "Read it every night. You're not broken. You're just tired. So was I." She read it on the days she doubted, on the nights when the dark still whispered lies. And somewhere along the way, the note became more than comfort. It became a thread she had to follow. She needed to find him. She called the taxi service first. They were hesitant, policy, privacy, but she was persistent. She didn't have his last name, just his voice, his kindness, and the letter D. After enough calls, enough dead ends, someone finally said, "There's a driver named Daniel, quiet guy, works odd hours, drives a green Crown Victoria, old model, not many of those left." It was enough. She searched everywhere, corner gas stations, shelter routes, downtown lots. Days passed, then a week. One overcast afternoon, with Lily bundled in her coat beside her, Isabel drove to the edge of the industrial district. She had heard that volunteers often brought food to unhoused communities nearby. She didn't expect to find him, but she did. The old green Crown Vic was parked near a church kitchen, trunk open. Daniel stood beside it, handing out brown paper bags to people in line. He wore a black hoodie beneath a worn jacket, jeans faded by time. His hair was longer than she remembered. But it was him, no question. She stepped out of her car slowly, heart pounding. She walked across the lot, and when he turned, just briefly, to glance toward the street, their eyes met. He froze. She stopped in front of him, breath catching. "I looked for you," she said, voice trembling. He blinked, his mouth parting just slightly. "You found me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I wasn't sure I would." Daniel glanced past her, saw Lily in the back seat waving shyly through the window. A soft smile flickered across his face. "I wasn't sure I wanted to be found," he admitted. Isabel nodded. "I get that." They stood in silence, surrounded by strangers, paper bags, and the scent of warm stew. Finally, she stepped closer. "Last time," she said gently, "I begged you to stay. I was lost. I couldn't breathe. And you didn't fix me, but you reminded me I wasn't gone." Daniel's eyes softened. "You fixed yourself." She shook her head, one tear slipping free. "I started to." She looked down, swallowed, then met his gaze. "This time," she said, voice firming, "I'm not asking you to stay the night. I'm asking you to stay, in whatever this becomes, not just tonight, but the days after. The ones where it's still hard, and the ones where it's not." He stared at her, really looked at her. The storm in her was quieter now. Still there, but no longer drowning her. She was steady, strong, healing. Daniel let out a slow breath and nodded. "I'd like that." Isabel smiled through tears. So would I. In the distance, Lily laughed inside the car. And in that moment, nothing felt broken. 1 year later, the world looked nothing like it had before. The mansion, once cold and echoing with silence, had been transformed into something entirely new, not just in furniture or paint, but in purpose. It had become the headquarters of the Morning Light Foundation, a nonprofit Isabel had built from scratch, designed to support mothers suffering from postpartum depression, women who were too afraid to ask for help, women who, like her, had once mistaken exhaustion for failure and silence for shame. She filled the house not with luxury, but with life. Counselors, volunteers, new moms with tearful eyes and trembling hands. Isabel met each of them with calm, with honesty, and with no trace of the woman who had once stood barefoot and broken in a doorway at midnight. Well, maybe a trace. Enough to remember. Enough to say, "I've been there." Daniel had never asked to be part of the foundation, but when Isabel told him she needed someone to coordinate rides for at-risk moms, emergency drop-offs, therapy visits, hospital transfers, he showed up with his old Crown Vic, polished and ready. He wasn't just a driver. He became the heartbeat of the fieldwork, reliable, warm, gentle with every woman and child who stepped into his car. Everyone simply knew him as Mr. Together, they rebuilt what pain had once destroyed. They didn't rush love. They didn't label what they had. They simply chose each other. Every day. Until the day came when Daniel chose to make it official. It was the foundation's 1-year anniversary celebration. The garden had been transformed with string lights, soft music, and tables overflowing with food prepared by the very mothers the program had helped. Guests gathered on the lawn, supporters, families, volunteers. A small stage had been set up beneath a white trellis wrapped in jasmine vines. Isabel wore a soft cream dress that danced with the breeze, her hair loose around her shoulders. Lily, now 3, ran around in a flower crown, handing cookies to anyone who would take one. Daniel had been quiet all evening. Not nervous, just ready. As the sun began to dip, casting the sky in watercolor pinks and gold, a volunteer tapped the microphone on the stage. "We'd like to close the evening with a few words from the man who helped build this from the ground up." Isabel turned, surprised, as Daniel stepped up to the microphone. He wore a simple black suit, his hair neater than usual, but his hands trembled slightly as he held a small note. He looked out over the crowd, then straight at Isabel. "When I met Isabel," he began, "she was holding herself together by the thinnest thread. I thought I was there to help her, but the truth is, she helped me more." He looked at Lily, now sitting cross-legged on the grass, smiling up at him. "She helped both of us." He took a breath, folded the note, and tucked it into his pocket. "I had a daughter once," he said softly, "and for a long time I thought that part of my life was over, that I didn't deserve another family, another chance." He looked back at Isabel, his voice steady now. But then came a rainy night, a front porch, a cry for help that echoed inside me more than I could explain, and in that moment I realized maybe it wasn't over. Maybe it was just waiting. He stepped down from the stage, walked slowly toward her, and then he knelt. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Isabel's hands flew to her mouth. Daniel looked up, eyes filled with the kind of love born not from fairy tales, but from the trenches of grief and grace. "That night, you saved me from myself," he said. "You gave me a place to stand when I was sinking. You gave me someone to believe in when I didn't believe in anything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opened it. Inside, simple, beautiful, a ring with a tiny moonstone. "Isabel, will you be the home I come back to for the rest of my life?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. She nodded, hands trembling. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, smiling through the tears. "Yes." Lily squealed and ran toward them, flinging her arms around both of their necks. The crowd erupted into applause. And in that moment, on that lawn, under that sky, there were no more broken pieces, no more lonely nights. Just three people, hand in hand, stepping through a path of jasmine petals toward a future they never imagined possible. They were no longer fragments. They were a family. Some stories begin with silence, with a cry no one hears, a night no one remembers. But sometimes, a stranger shows up in the rain, and everything changes. Isabel didn't need a rescue. Daniel didn't need a new life. But they found something neither expected: healing, love, and a home worth coming back to. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the quietest moments can change